You're listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Here are your hosts, Fran Chismar and Tom Knezik.
Welcome back to The Buzz, brought to you by the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. I am Fran Chismar.
And I'm Tom Knezik, and we are here today with episode 51, and this is going to be a Buzz episode about lawns. We had a little turf war last week, and now we have to do this. But first, Fran, I have a confession.
Yes.
Forgive me, Father, tell me, for I've sinned. I actually just reseeded my lawn last week, and I thought about irrigating it, but I didn't. It was supposed to rain. And it did rain a little bit, but not as much as I needed it to. And I was like, oh, this grass isn't going to come up unless I throw some water. And I held off more because I just didn't have the time to do it. But,
you know, I will say even though I'm getting ready to sell my house, I've been in this house on and off for 21 years. I've owned the house for 21 years. I have never fertilized it, reseeded it, watered it. I've never done anything to it. Now, I also have Zoysia Grass, which I don't know a lot about other than it goes dormant. It creates a very thick thatch layer and goes dormant in the winter. So in the winter, it looks dead.
Yeah.
But I don't have a lot of weeds in it other than onion grass and a couple dandelions. And it looks good because of the climate. But I have way too much lawn, but I'm not doing anything about it because I'm getting ready to move.
Yeah.
So if it wasn't for the fact that if I were staying, I'd totally be changing a lot of that. And a lot of the back where it's wet, I have wetlands in the back and a pipeline where I've let it go to meadow and things like that. But and have added seed to it. But,
yeah. The big thing and why I had to do this was I shouldn't say I had to, but I did do it was the front lawn looks great. And same thing, never irrigated, never fertilized. It's just I mow it high and that's it.
Yeah.
The backyard, we've had some disturbance. Like we put in a well 5 years ago, and there's some bare patches that had just not come back. So or if they did come back, it wasn't grass at all. It's been not even clover. I'm not even sure what it is, but it's not what we want there.
Yeah.
Especially when it's something where my son's going to play in a couple of years. We want to have grass.
Yeah.
So that's why I did that last week. Because there are some benefits to it, but we're going to get into that later.
We are. I'm still really getting my bearings after the soil episode. I learned a lot, and it was really a lot to take in, you know, and I said before, I don't know my soils, and I'm not just saying that. I really don't know. I know a limited amount. So it was really a lot. I mean, we didn't go into specifics. It was more ethical uses for it. And it kind of made me think of, we have a friend, Tim Gower, who has a nursery, and some of his land is on the former Jersey Jerry land here in New Jersey, which was a big apple grower. And one of the things that, you know, Tim is very big on soils, and Jersey Jerry was very big on soils too. And one of the conversations they had was that orchards in New Jersey produce a better tasting apple because it has to do with the soil interaction. It has the right soil for fruiting apples, which makes the apple more delicious. But the consumer wants a good looking apple, which because of the climate comes from typically the Pacific Northwest. They produce a beautiful looking apple, but it's not necessarily the tastiest apple, where New Jersey produces a really good tasting apple, but it's not a pretty apple. And it kind of loses out over looks. But he was like, a lot of the crops that we do well here because of the soil and match up. And it made me think of that, like how many people know that, like how many people realize that. Yeah,
the soil does make a difference. Sorry, I lost my spot here. but and that kind of it makes a difference into everything. But I guess this is where I was going to go with it. We tend to look at things have just gotten so global overall. Like with every recommendation, it's no longer you're no longer getting your local information of what you need to be doing locally. You're getting a broad overview of say, oh, you need to fertilize 16 times in the spring, and oh, you need to spray weed killer on this date and this date and this date.
Yeah.
But that's different everywhere you go.
Yes.
And then there isn't, I guess what I was trying to say, and this is what I was trying to say last episode too, there isn't a set plan where if you do these 5 things or 10 things, no matter where you are, you're going to have great results.
Yeah.
It depends on your local soils. It depends on your local climate. There's so many factors that weigh in that are going to change that plan. But we're always looking for that quick, okay, this is what I have to do type thing, and not have to do the extra thinking. But
if you think about it this way, I was thinking about one of our native plants. I was thinking about Tulip Poplar.
Mhm.
And Tulip Poplar is native from intercoastal plain through Appalachian, so through Piedmont Appalachian. Each of those are different soil types, and each one is a different temperate climate of their own.
Mhm.
And in turn, they each have their own watering requirements. It's because each condition is separate. So you can't necessarily, and that's why when you look at wetland indicator status, it gives it throughout different parts. It changes because of different soil types and things like that. So you can't, there's no one fix even for one plant across the board, unless of course it's like an emergence and it's always in, it's always in 6 inches of water or something like that. But there's a lot of things that change and are more specific as you move around the country.
Yeah. So with that, I think we should kick off the segments in today's episode, and we always start off with our favorite plants of the week. Let's get into That's Hot.
It's hot.
So I've gotten lazy. I typically change my background. I haven't done it. We've been too busy. But would you like to go first, or do you want me to go first?
I'll let you go first.
All right. So I talked about this on the last buzz. I was hoping that the last time I could have used this plant, but it wasn't quite up. But I'm going with Canada Mayflower, which is an ephemeral. And I have it naturally occurring in my yard. It's Myanthemum canadensis. Canadensis. I don't know if I typed it wrong or right.
Oh, I don't know
but
either.
It's a spring ephemeral, and it's emerging now. It won't flower until May, hence Mayflower. I think it's actually more like late May. And it has small white flowers in the spring. Why I like it is just because I have it naturally occurring in my yard, in like around the edges of the woods where it gets enough sunlight. There's enough opening in the canopy for it to get it to come through. But it's actually listed as endangered in New Jersey, which I didn't know. And it's pretty common in, like, I have it, my neighbor has it, and 2 neighbors, and that's it. But the chipmunks tend to like it. I do have plenty of chipmunks, and it does get a red berry. The chipmunks like the red berry. So,
and I actually, when you said that it was in danger, I was kind of surprised to hear that.
Yeah.
Because I've seen it in a lot of places, and I ended up looking it up, and it was a specific variety. Overall, it's not endangered, but there is. This is one of the really interesting things I've found is you have different forms of plants, and this is where a lot of the cultivars come from. Because I had another one last year. I think I was even asking you about it, where I found, and I wish I'd looked this part up earlier. I found a milkweed. It was clearly a milkweed in a really wet, sunny area. And it looked like swamp milkweed, but it also looked like common milkweed. It had with fuzzy leaves, and the leaves were a little bit wider, so it almost looked like a cross between the two. And I was having a lot of trouble figuring out what it was, so I sent it to 2 botanists that I really trusted, and they like quickly came back and said, I don't even know if I sent the picture. I think I just told them that. I'm like, oh yeah, it's this variety of Asclepias incarnata. And then there was actually another. So you had Asclepias incarnata variety. I think it started with a P, and then it was like Forma. There was a white one too, and it was Forma something else. So it was actually, I found a variety of Asclepias incarnata and then a form of that variety all in one spot. It was kind of
that's pretty awesome. And we see it here on the nursery. We see Lobelia cardinalis and Lobelia syphilitica, the blue lobelia and cardinal flower kind of mixing, and Penstemon hirsutus. We've had some variations coming up in there where you get natural crosses. So it's pretty common, but not as common as, like, some of them. It's common that it happens, but not common that you see them like very often. those strains are rare.
And that's I see thousands, if not like tens of thousands of Asclepias incarnata every single year.
Yeah.
And just because we're growing them in a nursery.
Yeah.
And I'd never seen one come up that looked like that. And it just threw me for a loop. I wasn't familiar with it, so I didn't know what the heck it was. But that's not my plant this week. My plant is actually the flowering dogwood, Cornus Florida. It really has beautiful flowers, which the flower, if you want to really get technical, the flower is just the center part. It's the white petals per se are actually bracts, which is similar to leaves. So the flower is really just the middle of it, but for the sake of the episode, we're going to call the whole thing the flower, but it's really, really beautiful. It has these big white flowers with yellow centers. There's lots of cultivated varieties now because it's such a popular plant. But I really like the irregular look of that understory species.
I do too. And it's funny. It's not one that I recognize. Like, I know the leaf, I know the bark, but I don't see it often. Like, and I just realized I have some flowering in my woods right now that I probably never picked out it was there before, and that's until it flowered. Last
year on our new farm, I saw a handful of them, and this year I'm seeing them all over, and just like in the understory of that farm. And one of the things when I was reading about it that made a lot of sense, I was like, well, how come that one doesn't have very many flowers at all? This one has tons of flowers. That all depends on sunlight. Yeah. So Cornus Florida can take and thrives in the understory where it's getting dappled sunlight at best. But if you get it into a sunny area, like on a hedgerow, on the edge of the woods, it gets covered in flowers. And that's, I was actually confused when you look up Google Cornus Florida. The first picture that comes up is this like stately tree that is covered in white flowers. I'm like, that's not what ours look like.
But it
in
does
the woods.
make it. If you give it the space, it makes a beautiful tree. Like right now, you can see a lot on front yards, and they may be varieties. There's like Cloud9 and all these other ones. But it makes a great small understory tree. Which is beautiful. But I think right on that wood's edge, I agree with you. Like, you see it flowering like really good. That's kind of like my favorite place to see it.
It'll get about 30 feet tall. Has what was I gonna say? Could get like 12 inches in diameter. That would be a really big one. Would be a 12-inch in diameter tree. Has red fruit in the late summer, fall, which are really good for birds. Also edible to humans, but they don't taste very good. So I don't want to hear a call in from Saul saying that. I ate the.
I don't know that they're necessarily long-lived trees. I want to say like 20 to 30 years max out of those, and they are susceptible to anthracnose and other things.
Then the last thing I had on there was their host plants for a number of different moths, including some Cecropia moths, and they're also the state tree of Missouri and Virginia, and the state flower of Virginia and North Carolina.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah. And it's one of my favorite trees this time of year, just because it's blooming and it looks so different than everything else that's that's starting to bloom right now.
That's a great choice. Wonderful choice. All right.
So with that, let's move on to this week's botany-based current events. Of course, we got to make it a competition as always. So let's move along to this or that.
You can get with this, or you can get with that.
So I didn't follow up just to double check, but the winner is, I think it's me. I think it was 12-5.
Yeah, it wasn't
last time I looked.
Close. I got a little too gloaty last week. I think the voters took it out on me. But
this is what I thought was hysterical. So one of our listeners who we communicate with quite regularly, Deborah Rosenthal, whose husband RJ Comer contributed a lot of the theme music for the Buzz and also for Rooted Discussions. So she sent me an article, and I've had listeners send articles before saying, hey, maybe for a Buzz, this or that, this may interest you. So she sent me an article that just happened to be on lawns. And I noticed she sent it to me after she voted for you. And she's like, maybe this will help you, get back on track and win one. But then I found out from you later.
Yeah, she had also sent me an article, a different article that was also on, I wouldn't say lawns, but yards and some HOA requirements.
So I like that she was trying to steer, and she did not know that we were planning this episode on lawns. we were just naturally going there. After the soil one, we decided, hey, we should really do one on lawns. But she was kind of like goading us into a competition against each other with lawns and start a whole lawn thing, which I think we're on to you, Deborah.
Yeah. Yes, we are.
We are on to you.
And we definitely appreciate the submission. So if you do come across an article that you want to hear us talk about,
please.
We can't guarantee that we are going to talk about it, but send it to us because it saves us a little bit of time looking for stuff at the very least.
No, and I really appreciate it because I know Alyssa Joy Lewis has given me articles. One of our employees, Noel, gave me the one about the solar panels in California along waterways. So I really appreciate it. You know, we're always on the lookout ourselves, but sometimes we don't see everything and we get something that's really good. Yeah. So I think I'm actually going to go first. I am using Deborah's article. I know you are not.
I'm not. No.
You are not, but I'm going to use Deborah's article. So it's called Grow or Mow, a Lawn War Springs Up in England. And I thought this was really interesting because when I think of England, I actually have a sister that lives in England. And when I think of England, I think of their gardens and like stately lawns. So, and it was written by Max Colchester of the Wall Street Journal. Yours is from the Wall Street Journal. Too, right?
Yeah.
So, and I'm I picked out some. It's better. It was much better written than I could paraphrase. So I actually plucked out some paragraphs from the article. But last month, Monty Don, a broadcaster on a popular BBC gardening show.
If that's not a British name,
Monty Don, that's about as British. He broke ranks with long-standing English convention in an interview with Radio Times magazine, calling for British men to halt their obsession with closely cropped lawns, warning that it burns a lot of fossil fuel, makes a filthy noise, and it's about the most injurious thing that you can do to wildlife. And I'm very, I don't want to speak for you, but I feel the same with that. So amid concerns about the environment, some of the finest lawns in Britain are flirting with rewilding. A large part of a once revered black lawn at University of Cambridge's King College was turned into a meadow last year. Several squads of the University of Oxford have gone the same way, and a #NoMoMay campaign is gaining traction online. So well-maintained lawns are under assault, says Mr. Hedges Gower, chairman of the recently created Lawn Association. Lawns have a big part to play in our world, he says. The ill education from celebrity gardeners is unbearable. Lawns are a tradition in England, and even Prince Charles has championed meadows. And Prince Charles is a huge advocate, and we learned that from Dr. Enrique Sala, just with how much work he has done. And it's, the Lawn Association is going through and saying, hey, maybe you shouldn't mow low, you should mow higher, and talking about some of the positives that lawn has. But I think, in my opinion, when you're stating these positives that lawn has, there's some big omissions. And it's not one positive you never hear from lawns is how good it is for pollinators in the ecosystem. Now, if you let lawns get taller, yes, maybe pollinators can actually have a little more function in there. But a finely cropped lawn really does. It's not helping with, I shouldn't say it doesn't help with insects, but maybe not the right type of insects. So, and obviously to maintain it, if you're putting down the fertilizer, and that's going into the soil, and then watering, and the runoff, that type of thing. And I agree that there are some positives, and we're going to go into this. I know this is the topic, so I should probably stop. But I just thought it was interesting that it's not just happening here, and it's a big enough war in England that the Wall Street Journal is picking it.
And I didn't realize that they had a NoMoMay too. Because by the time everyone's listening to this, it's going to be at least the day before NoMoMay, if it isn't.
Yeah.
And I'll get into that later too. I keep waffling back and forth about NoMoMay, but no, that's a really cool article. And it's nice to know that it's happening elsewhere. Like, we kind of feel like this is just happening here. I know the same thing's happening. Well, we just learned the same things happening in the UK. I've heard of similar things happening in like New Zealand and Australia. So it is becoming a worldwide trend that we're leaning towards.
I do have some issues with NoMoMay also. I'll go into that when we hit it. I'll go into it. But that's basically mine.
Yeah.
I'll let you go.
My article is also from the Wall Street Journal, and that's funny. Last time we were both about Philly, and now we're both the Wall Street Journal.
Wall Street Journal.
But mine is not so much about native plants, although they do talk about one native plant in the article. But it was titled "The New Status Symbol for High Net Worth Homeowners: Trophy Trees," which I just still thought, oh man, this is gonna be like good.
Yeah.
And it was written by Catherine Clark, and basically summarized it was that rich people, like, well, all people, are getting more and more impatient. They don't want to buy, but we don't want to buy little trees and then have to wait for them to grow up. But big trees are expensive. Rich people are just able to afford those big trees.
Not only that, when you're moving big trees, that is a huge transplant shock, and that's a lot of care to get established. Also,
and we actually just had a tour of a big tree nursery last week for another organization I'm part of. And I knew big trees were expensive. I didn't realize they were that expensive. And I can't remember the species, but he was saying they basically cost like $1,000 an inch. So if you wanted a big tree, so like 14-inch diameter tree is what he referenced, you're going to be paying $14,000. And now that would be an inexpensive tree as compared to the trees in this article. So basically you had these like super elite wealthy people who, the ones that you didn't really even hear of, the ones that were like the owners of big tech companies and media conglomerates, not the people like the Kardashians you're seeing on TV, the people who own the networks that played those shows. That's who they were talking about. And basically they were going around and finding these big trees, often on private property. It was say, oh, that person has a big tree in their lawn that would be perfect for my client. And the landscaper would then go approach that homeowner and say, hey, I'd like to buy your tree. And they would negotiate a price. And that was actually somewhat difficult, they were saying, because say we were in southern Florida and you're right on a canal and it was a big tree that they could kind of bring a barge in the canal with a big crane on it, dig it out, and then pick it up, put it on the barge and float it away. Well, that was pretty easy, and they could pay a lot more money for the tree for that. Say it was in someone's backyard and you had power lines in the way and it was hard to get to. Well, that kind of cut out of the tree owner's price that they could charge because it cost so much more to get the tree out of there. But they were talking like in the hundreds of thousands of dollars for some of these trees, and like 90-foot tall trees that they were taking out of some places and moving to others. And so one of the other things I learned at this tour was with some of these trees, especially if you're driving them over the road, well, you get a low profile trail or something that's low to the ground. But if when you're driving down the highway or any road, you'll often see when you go under a bridge or an overpass, there's a sign on the side that'll have a height listed, and it'll say something like max height 12'6", max height 13'1". Well, some of these trees, when you dig out the root ball, like a 14-inch tree, you'd need a 140-inch root ball, but to fit under most bridges, it could only be like 136 inches. So you would have to dig that tree so that it fit underneath the bridges, which sometimes meant digging it a little bit, root pruning it so that root ball could be a little smaller. Well, now you're talking about a 90-foot tree that's longer than the trailer is already. How would they do that? So one of the things they came up with was, well, one, you could move it on a barge or a crane if you had access to not moving it over the road.
And for listeners that don't know, the average length of the root system is twice the canopy. So if you have a 90-foot tree that has a canopy that's, let's just say 30 foot wide, the roots are stretching 60 feet. So in circumference. And then, you know, if it had a good root system when it was put in. So that's a lot.
Oh yeah.
Like when you're paring that down, it's still not that big of a root ball.
But yeah, so this is basically what they ended up doing on a lot of these trees that were super huge, either tall or diameter, was they would cut them into 4 pieces, which when I first read that, I'm like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. How do they do that? But basically what they were doing is making long vertical cuts. They had like these 6-foot chainsaw blades and would cut vertically the whole length of the tree. And effectively what they did was turned it into 4 trees. So then they could move each of those individual pieces a lot easier. And then when they got to the site, they would put this tree back together. And they said the tree, they had like a very, very high success rate. The trees responded great. Obviously there could be issues, and they'd have insurance policies of like $25,000 on all these trees, just in case they died, because then they'd have to refund the customer and all that. But they were cutting these trees into 4 pieces vertically, and then they'd get to the site and then kind of like bolt and ratchet strap them back together until they would heal over.
Wow.
But he said even then, you basically had 4 trees that were growing right next to each other that were quartered.
Yeah.
The tree never was one single organism again. It didn't heal that way, but the bark would heal over the outside, so it looked like it was one single tree.
Wow.
And that raised a lot of concern because people were then saying, well, you're torturing these trees in a way, like you don't have to do this. But his defense was, a lot of these trees are getting cut down. They're big, they're tall, they're next to businesses, they're next to homes. The people who own them don't necessarily want them there, and they think they're a risk to falling. And this fellow was in Southern California or Southern Florida, so they had a lot of hurricanes, and people were like worried, oh, this is going to blow over in the next hurricane. So he was like, sometimes they wanted to cut them down but couldn't afford to cut them down. Well, this is a way to give it to someone who would still keep the tree. The tree would stay alive. It's not getting cut down. They got some money for it. It benefited all parties in most cases.
Awesome.
So, but they also had like they brought in, this is a home in Southern California where they brought in a 150-year-old olive tree from Tuscany, and just basically took a crane and like they built like a glass enclosed courtyard in the middle of this house and then lowered it down in the house. It was insane. Well, some of the stuff they're doing.
But I understand the reasoning, because if you think about it, say you're building a $15 million mansion, you're really clearing a ton of area.
Yeah.
So you can get the material in there to build it. Then you can't put a 2-inch caliber tree or a 10-foot tall tree in front of a $15 million mansion. It doesn't work. Like you need something instant perspective.
Exactly.
And that's the only way you're going to get it. You know, I do appreciate businesses like Merck in New Jersey, when they built their headquarters. They didn't just cut everything down. They harvested everything. They created a nursery. And then after the facility was built, they went back through and put the trees back. Like they tried to recreate a little bit of that natural area around it, which is another great thing that you could do. They didn't just cut down and look elsewhere. It was just like, we have all these great trees here, let's save them and use them, which I thought was great. But I had a customer in New York who built spec houses in Greenwich, Connecticut, and started his own garden center, and would send people all over the country just to find plant material. And they would literally buy boxwood hedges that were 5 foot tall and piece them back, like take them apart and piece them back together in the garden center. That someone could come in and buy a whole hedge, or if he wanted it for the house. It's, you know, back in the 80s, people would just steal it. You know, you put, I remember,
I'm sure that probably
I remember trees with, you know, cut leaf red maples where I worked at the time. We had them that were $10,000 and $20,000 a piece, like, and they'd get planted at a bank and then disappeared a week later. You know, someone just saw it and was like, I want that. And they would dig it back out because they knew it was pretty fresh. So it's, you would start seeing trees with chains. It wasn't like an expensive tree. You would see with like a chain around it, so that someone couldn't take it.
No, it was a really interesting article. And the one last tidbit from there was, they said this is probably one of the only things, well, I'm actually paraphrasing this, probably one of the only things that Michael Jordan ever lost was a bidding war for this giant oak tree that he wanted in his house. And he lost out. Someone else bid more money, and it was in like the hundreds of thousands of dollars for this tree.
I think he probably could have kept bidding.
Yeah, you'd think so.
I think at some point, I have a feeling he could have won it if he wanted to. He just got to a point where it's like, I'm sure I can find another.
So if anyone's looking to make a little extra side cash, just raise some big, beautiful trees and have them in your yard, and maybe someone will come along and buy them. But
so I think that do you have anything else?
No, that was it.
All right.
And of course, the choice is yours.
Yeah, so make sure you go to the Facebook page and vote for your favorite article. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the article. It could just be our presentation.
Yes.
Or just whoever you like more. So,
but just vote because
there can be only one.
Yes.
So this week we're adding a new segment.
Am I going to have to come up with a theme for this?
Oh, I don't, maybe.
All right, I'll have to look at it.
But and we're only doing this because we've had so many of these, but, or so much good interaction. So we wanted to do some listener shout outs.
Yeah.
And so this week and every week going forward, we're going to pick 2 people that we really liked what they're doing in the Facebook group, or something they emailed us, or just a random interaction we have. And we're going to let you know how much we appreciate it on our podcast here. So I'll go first, Fran.
Sure, go ahead.
And mine was Skip Burns, because after a solo episode, and I forgot to respond to him on his comment on Facebook, he said that we were killing it every week, and that's what we want to hear, because we think we're doing a good job, but it's nice to hear that we are doing a good job.
If you don't hear it, you don't know. I mean, we obviously see our listens increase, and that's a good thing, but we don't know, unless you tell us, we don't know what you like, what you don't like. We hear what you don't like. That we get, but
and well, Skip was back on our listener episode, which I think was episode 20. It was a little while ago. Yeah. So I even respect it even more coming from him, because I know he knows his plants, and he's doing a lot of seeding and research on his own.
And he's been a long time listener also. So the fact that you started listening at the beginning, and you're continuing to listen now that we're in the 50s of the episodes, I appreciate that. And I know I mentioned we would share how we ran into Jennifer. So Tom mentioned on the Soil podcast that as soon as we knew we had Ray, a lot of people didn't want to do it just because they were a little intimidated. So we had Ray, and this was a Friday afternoon, and it wasn't still locked down. We had Stephanie, which we just confirmed, and that's all that we had. So I'd gotten an email from Nutrition for Longevity with Jennifer copied, and they had just become a customer, and they were coming in Monday to pick up plant material. And I kept looking at her name going, I know this name. Like, I don't know where I know this name from, but I know this name. And I did a Microsoft Outlook search, and she had the same publicist that Dr. Enrique Sala did. And they actually had reached out to us about Jennifer in the fall. And we just didn't have a place to kind of work her in. Like, we weren't there yet with the soils. And I saw it, and it was just like, wow, this is almost like perfect timing. She would be fantastic for this podcast. So we just happened to reach out to her Friday, and she got back to us Friday afternoon. So we recorded Monday morning at 9:00, and we didn't have it finalized until 5:00 Friday afternoon.
Oh yeah. We were like hoping and praying, because I know Fran went home for the day, and it just happened that Ray had called me back. We talked earlier I think the prior week, or maybe it was even that week, saying, oh yeah, we can do next week. But then I texted him a couple of times, I didn't get any confirmation, so I was getting worried. And then he called, and I called Fran and said, hey, okay, Ray's in, so we got 2. And then it was like 20 minutes later, Jennifer called, and I happened to still be in the office, and I had to explain the whole thing, and it worked out, and we were really happy to have her.
She had to have her husband pick up so that she could but it worked out, and she was a fantastic guest, and they were all great guests. And I couldn't be happier with how last minute it was, how well it worked out together.
So that's not your listener shout out.
No, actually my listener shout out, I don't know the person's name, and I didn't actually have the interaction myself, but one of our coworkers was at a local farm brewery, who's also a friend of ours by Brett at Screaming Hill, Brett Bullock at Screaming Hill Brewery at Bullock Farms. So Glenn was there with a friend and enjoying some beers, and he had his Pinelands Nursery jacket on, and a woman came up to him and started asking him, saying that she was a fan of the podcast, and asking if he was one of us, I
don't even know if Glenn knew we were doing this.
No,
I don't know if Glenn knew.
He didn't have a whole lot of information to add, but it was impressive that someone saw the Pinelands Nursery, thought about the podcast, and was willing to come up and introduce himself. So I still have not been noticed in public as of yet. Like, I haven't been, no one's like, hey, are you Fran? I want that. Yeah. And Glenn got it. Glenn got it instead of us. But we appreciate you listening and coming up to even talk to us, even though it turned out to not be one of us. But if you're listening and we're mentioning, call in or shoot us a note just to say hello. We'd love to say hello to you.
Yeah, perfect.
So,
all right, time to answer some questions.
All right.
I want to ask you a bunch of questions, and I want to have them answered immediately.
It's as simple
simple question.
No, I didn't hear you. What was your question?
So we only got one question this week, and it's not even really on topic. So you can guess who it's from. But it's worth playing just so we can point out some of the problems with the with the message.
Okay.
So
yeah, let's do it.
All right.
Hi, fellas. Hi. It's your pal Saul. Saul Rosenberg. I just wanted to add a comment, if I might, and an inoculation, if you would. You've been talking again very persuasively. Thomas, the English muffin, I must give you a lot of credit or props, as the children say. And also you, Pam, you've done a more than adequate job, which for you, I know, is quite an effort, and it is to be commended. Now, we were talking on the radio, I just heard, about the calorie pair. And here's my suggestion. Since so many of us today are more health conscious and perhaps trying to shed some pounds that your listeners on the radio might have heard, that they might have added on during the COVID, perhaps a low calorie tree, right? Instead of the calorie pear, a lower calorie tree like the swamp maple or the Acer rubrum. I wish you boys would use more of the botanical knowledge that you have stored up there, kind of the way a squirrel takes nuts and puts them away for the winter. Pam, I know you know what I'm talking about here, that you have a vast knowledge, and a lower calorie tree might be the best way to get people more enthusiastic about making a substitution. Okay, guys, a wonderful show as always. I love the music who's that fella, JJ? He's done a marvelous job, and I really do like it. And, I'm Saul. I'm gardening here in the Garden State. I have quite an extensive property. And I invite you, Pam, to come back. It was great having you out here, I guess, about 5 years ago. And bring the English Muffin Man with you. Okay, fellas, bye now.
I wonder how Saul knows that a red maple would be less calories.
Yeah,
like it's a low-fat tree. I wonder. I'm curious what research he's done. I will say, for the record, I've never been to Saul's property. I'd love to know where Saul lives. It's somewhere in New Jersey, and he says he has a carriage house. So I would love to see this facility. But by calorie pair, it's not. We're not talking about its nutritional content. It's actually the species of pear. It's Callery. It's the name of the pear. So it's
at the very least we've cleared up some confusion.
Yes,
might have been
yes,
happening there.
And if you haven't seen it, there was a video that I posted in our Facebook group and also on our YouTube page about just how invasive calorie pears have been. It was in bloom, so it was they were easy to point out. We were trying to point it out while it was still pertinent.
Yep.
But I just totally lost my train of thought.
Oh, I don't know where you're going either.
I don't know where I was. I have no idea.
Yeah, it's good to highlight a lot of these invasives because, we actually had, when we talked about last year about this time, there's someone wrote in and said, oh yeah, when I learned that's what those are, driving down the highway and you just see calorie pear and forsythia and all this invasive stuff in bloom on the side of the road. It really makes you sad.
Yeah, I actually filmed a few videos a day. It actually made me late for where I was going. I was meeting my fiance, and I ended up a half an hour late because I was filming videos. But I wanted to stop on 295, which is a major throughway in New Jersey, and there was a point in the riparian buffer along the highway where it was nothing but invasives. You could see it was highway on one side, agricultural field on the other side, and the riparian buffer, it was all forsythia and calorie pear, and I'm trying to remember what else it was, but it was all invasive. It was multiflora rose. It was like 3 or 4 invasives that filled the whole area, and it was kind of sad to see that this whole riparian buffer was all invasives and no natives at all. And I wanted to stop and do a video there, but I felt it probably wasn't my safest place to pull over and do a video.
And it's always a good time to educate people about invasives. And one of the things I actually just noticed, and I was fighting the good fight on the interwebs last night on the old Facebook, and someone who actually said, "Oh, I bought these Japanese barberry, which is illegal for sale now in Delaware and in New York and Connecticut, or not Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire. There's quite a few states that have banned the sale or phasing out the sale of Japanese barberry, which is great. And someone had bought some in New Jersey because you're still allowed to, and then they read online that it was invasive, and this was a native plant group. This was a gardening group that I was in, and then people were commenting, some people saying invasive and some people saying it wasn't invasive, and it became clear that people were thinking that the term invasive meant that it spread in their garden. Not necessarily. And one person said, it's not invasive, the birds love the berries, all this and that. And I don't know, I felt bad commenting, well, it's invasive because the birds eat the berries and then move them elsewhere, not because it sends up more shoots in your garden that you don't want there.
Well, you were just showing me video of your property where you were hunting, and there were barberry naturally occurring there.
Exactly. I took a video just yesterday. My dad and I went out turkey hunting. This is one of my favorite times of year to be out in the woods, just because, and turkey hunting is special in its own way. Because, well, turkeys just make an awesome noise. They're such a unique bird, but you're going out there an hour before dawn and sometimes more, and you're just kind of sitting there as quiet as you can be, and you just watch the woods wake up. And around, so sunrise is at 6:04, as far along as it was on Monday, but so 6:04, well, it starts getting brighter around like 5:30, and right as it starts getting, the sun is just barely like visible. You can't even see the sun, it's just the light from the sun is just barely visible. Well, you start hearing some birds, and you start hearing some more birds, and then you start hearing the turkeys gobble, and it's just like a magical time to be out there, because you're just being perfectly quiet, but everything else is so amazingly loud in a way. But you also get to see some really cool species. It's some of the first things are starting to flower and leaf out. And in the video, I was highlighting the Cornus Florida, because we have a whole bunch in that woods there. And then also found a whole bunch of black haw viburnum, which is Viburnum Prunifolium. And actually, even when I went back out, I re-recorded the video because I recorded it in the wrong way. And when I went back out, I found a whole bunch of Viburnum dentatum that were only maybe 6 inches tall.
Oh, awesome.
And that kind of sucked in a way, because I'm like, oh, you're gonna get eaten.
I was just thinking, I was surprised that they hadn't been
some
eaten.
of them had been browsed a little bit, but I just happened to be walking. I'm like, that looks like a Viburnum dentatum leaf, and I looked down and started crawling around. I'm like, I think that is a Viburnum dentatum. Oh, there's another one, and they're just not going to make it, because that woods, and I also say this in the video, which is going to go up on our YouTube channel and Facebook shortly. It actually will probably be out by the time you listen to this, but you can look and you can see how there's some stuff that's barely germinating on the ground, and then there's nothing up until you get to about 6 feet, other than some greenbrier, and then you have some invasives. You have your multiflora rose, and you have a bunch of Japanese barberry, which I also show in the video. And it's amazing once you start to really key in on this stuff. It's amazing the places you find it.
I wanted to mention, I forgot about it before this past weekend. My fiance and I, Agatha and I, had to run to Home Depot, so I wanted to take a walk through the garden center just to take a look, just to see what they had in stock. And they had barberry. They were fully stocked in Japanese barberry. So it was really sad to see it.
And I understand it is a deer resistant plant, so I understand the appeal to it. But one of the things and I have mixed feelings about it, but I think it's a good step, is their University of Connecticut actually came out with a seedless version of Japanese barberry called Crimson Cutie. It's morphed off of it's supposed to resemble the Crimson Pygmy, which is another
which
Japanese
is a dwarf
barberry.
red. It's
a dwarf red Japanese barberry. So this is a dwarf red Japanese barberry, but it doesn't have seeds.
And here's my issue with that. There was very little ecosystem benefit with barberry, other than some birds have adapted to eat the seeds. So now there's no. So you took all this effort to create something that has no ecosystem benefit just because people are trained to buy it. And that's what's sad. It's just another Band-Aid. That deer won't eat it, but you're creating all these other issues where.
And that was my feeling on it, is okay, so well, now it's not bad,
Yeah.
but it's not necessarily good. It's just doesn't have the invasive qualities.
Yeah.
But it's not benefiting the whole system.
But you know what?
So-
Throughout the years, I've heard all these seedless varieties of this, which is better, and they all kind of revert
Mhm.
slowly and become an issue. Like none of them have ever really worked out. So
Yeah.
it's, I applaud Delaware for really taking the step and banning these invasives. And like I was saying, like I done a video of the English ivy in Agatha's yard, and for all the natives in her yard, there's an equal amount of invasives, none of which were planted there. It was, and I accidentally said native instead of invasive when I was talking to Rosa Sharon, but she has probably 20 Rosa Sharon bushes in her yard, and periwinkle and English ivy and wisteria and all these things that were banned that are encroaching on all the wonderful native plants that are naturally occurring or that we planted. So it's, it's just, there's so many arguments where people are just, they take the easy sale. And I find this a lot in our industry. They want to keep growing it because it's easy to grow and they can sell it. But they could easily sell something else if they chose to sell something else. They just take the easy way. So, and that's my issue with it.
Yeah, it's so the big point of that whole diatribe we just went on is we need to do a lot of education, and it's got to be good education. Just saying, hey, that's a bad plant, you're stupid for planting it, isn't gonna work.
No.
And I hadn't responded to that comment or how it's not invasive yet, but I'm going to and say, hey, well, here's why it is invasive.
You could even show your video of it.
Exactly.
Up, and that's part of the reason why we're doing these videos. For someone that doesn't know, you can share one of these videos on one of these invasive items and just say, this is why it's invasive.
Yeah.
It's a little bit easier when you see it. Sometimes if you're not tuned into it, you can walk through. I've walked through Crystal Lake so many times, didn't notice the burning bush at first. Your eyes just aren't looking for it. So
and it's like I kind of said before, I've walked through that woods a ton of times. Is at the back of our property. I walk through it all the time, and I only noticed like 2 Cornus Florida, and then it just so happened on Monday and then Tuesday I saw like 40 of them, and I'm like, oh, where did all these come from? And they're all older trees, they weren't new seedlings, but I just hadn't noticed before. And then same thing, my dad and I were walking around one morning, he's like, oh, there's Japanese barberry right here, and I'm like, oh yeah, I hadn't noticed it walking around. And then I've only noticed it in one other part of that the woods there that was on the far other end. But then even when I was taking the video, it happened to be sitting between the Black Haw and the Cornus Florida, and I looked down, oh, it's right here. And then you look around, there's more and more and more. But you talked about your fiance Agatha's lawn, so why don't we transition to yards and lawns?
All right, so where would you like to start?
Well, you had a pretty interesting story from one of your past career moves, so why don't we start there?
Yeah, I'm not going to say the name of the company, but I once worked for a lawn company, a nationally known lawn company, back in the mid 90s. For about 9 months, I had taken a job as a sales rep, and as a sales rep, you had to do a couple weeks as a technician, just so that you knew the job. And I had worked on primarily selling treatment plans for shrubs and trees. So for fungicides or insecticides. So I would go to people's property and evaluate what I saw, and we would sell plans. And I didn't have a good feeling about it even about then. And I think it was more wild, accept it. What you did find was a lot of the wrong plants planted in the wrong places, and they were weakened and attacked by insects or disease, and then being sprayed. But what was interesting to me was just the concept of the business at that point. And this place has branches all over, so I'm sure it varies. But my branch, when I came in, I had this salesman training, and they showed you this video about how your customers aren't customers, they're people, and you need to do this and all these things. So at the end of the video, it was shut off, and they said, that's bull. People are dollar signs. and that's how you're going to treat this. People are money, and you're going to bleed them for everything they have. And I'm not even paraphrasing. The only thing I did was take out the obscenity, and it was like a Glengarry Glen Ross type setting, and it was really like that. Like it was to them, it was all about proving to the stockholders how many new acquisitions that you had. So they would let people cancel just to sell it to them cheaper, so that you could say, I picked up X many new customers this week. But the people that were canceling were like, you killed my dog, you killed this, you killed that. It was amazing. And it was a long list of people that had canceled with these complaints. And it was just all spraying chemicals. Now, it was at a time where I think it was less conscious, but even at the national convention that year, the owners, their theme was Men in Green instead of Men in Black. And they had cemented their entire properties and then covered it with sod, and then was spraying it and watering it to keep it green, saying that you could have a green lawn no matter how bad your soil is. Like, and it's so wrong on so many levels. And
this was back in
the mid 90s.
Okay.
This was the mid 90s.
Things may have changed since then.
Yes. And that was my experience, and it was a very bad experience. And we went through hundreds of people in the 9 months I was there. And, it's just, and not to say that there weren't good people there doing the right thing too, that comes from corporate, but this is one of the top, at the time, this company was one of the top landscape companies in the nation. So we're talking $1 billion. We're talking right now that goes against the grain of what is $1 billion industry, easily. So I just wanted to share that experience. It brings up some of the things that I mentioned in that Soils podcast. It kind of started that whole turf grass lawn conversation. Was I was watching a YouTube video, and obviously YouTube goes to a national audience. It's not like you can select who's going to watch it. And this person was based out of the Midwest, and they were basically saying, oh yeah, you need to do this. You need to do this. And he was giving like dates and saying, on around like the first week in October, you're going to want to fertilize. And this, I forget exactly what he was talking about, but it was like very specific information saying, oh, if you live in this area, or he actually did break it up north and south. But it was like, you have to fertilize, you have to put down weed killer, you have to reseed at this time, you have to do this. And it was very scheduled. But he never talked about what the person's soil looked like. If you put down fertilizer and you don't need fertilizer, you're not doing anything to help the plant. It's not going to benefit the plant in any way if it has all the nutrients it can use already. And I know a lot of is said about golf courses and the amount of chemicals they use, but if you think about college campuses or business campuses, that company I'd worked for, their main business was commercial spraying. Where they would go to campus, they would have crews stationed at that campus year round, just doing spraying and fertilizing and maintenance to keep a lawn that no one was using. And I guess that's where we both, I think you feel the same way. If you're using it, there is a purpose for lawn in certain amounts. If you're using it, but this is lawn that wasn't, it was for show, not for use. So I thought I had kind of looked up some stats. I know you looked up some stats. I thought maybe we could kind of kick it off with some stats that, just about, and then we can ethically talk about it a little bit more. So I got these stats from Columbia University. Homeowners use 10 times the amount of pesticide and fertilizer per acre than farmers do on crops. That's shocking to me.
And I'll even go take that a step further. And this is not from Columbia University. This is from Tom's brain. But a lot of times when we talk about homeowners versus farmers, you have homeowners misusing those pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers, where the farmers tend to generally speaking, are using it properly. They're overusing it and misusing
they're
it.
getting licensed for the most part, and are following the directions, or even working with sales reps to make sure they're using the right product and the right
even
thing.
Kicking back to our chemicals, last buzz about chemicals is like I'm a licensed pesticide applicator. I barely use
I was
anything.
at one point in Pennsylvania.
I think we have like 6 or 7 people who are licensed through the state. So you learn a lot. I would say probably 90% of what we use at the nursery when we do use stuff, it's stuff you can go buy at Home Depot and you don't need any license to use it.
Exactly.
And
you're not following the directions. You're just doing it. So 30 to 60% of urban fresh water is used on lawns. That one really shocked me.
And that's where Ray really kicked in and said, yeah, in the Northeast where you get enough rain that you don't need to irrigate. Okay, have a lawn. But out in Arizona and New Mexico and Colorado's a big state where they're diverting all this water just to irrigate a lawn. Oh, that doesn't make any sense.
You know, the one stat that Ray shot out there that really shocked me was that 40% of our rainfall comes from inland plant materials, and that some of these places that were delicately balanced by taking too much of that plant material away to create cities is what created the barren conditions and the drought. So they went from being meadows to desert, and it's that really amazes me. So the amount of water that's used just because it's what you're taught and what your neighbors want to see or what you want to see. American lawns occupy 30 to 40 million acres of land,
which makes that legitimately the largest crop in the United States. And that's most of that's lawn folk. We think about golf courses, and you have turf farms too. Most of that's lawn. The golf courses make up very little of that total,
and not all of that is used. You know, I understand a soccer field. I understand a baseball field. I understand a patch of grass that your children are going to play on.
But that 40 million acres is more than what's in corn production and soybean production and a lot of other different crops. So.
Lawnmowers to maintain these American lawns account for 5% of our nation's air pollution. So, and it's nice to see listeners like McCoy Horticulture, Richard McCoy, switching to electric equipment. That's, every little bit helps. 17 million gallons of fuel are spilled during refilling of this lawn and garden equipment,
which is amazing to me, because you look at that 17 million gallon number. And I'd seen this statistic before. That's more gasoline than there was oil in the BP Deepwater Horizon explosion. Like that's more gallons, and that's per year.
That's per
not
year.
Total. That's per year. So, and I get it. I've been there filling up the lawnmower, filling up the weed whacker. It spills. It's like you're not, or even when you're paying attention, you get close to the top and just spills a little bit.
I've accidentally swallowed gasoline.
I'm not going to ask how you did that.
I worked back in the late 80s. I worked landscaping for about a year, and I was refilling equipment, but the gas cans were on a shelf. And as I was pulling the gas can off, it got caught on the shelf and it came out of the spout. And I'm glad it didn't land in my eyes, but it went directly into my mouth. So not a good.
This is a little sidebar, but have you ever seen the Wild and Wonderful Whites of West Virginia?
No.
It used to be on Netflix. I don't know what it's on now, but it's a story about this Appalachian family who their dad was like a famous clogger.
Oh, okay.
So, but then
I think I've heard of this actually.
I might have told you about it before, but eventually, like a lot of once he was actually murdered. And then after that, the family kind of lost its way outside of the matriarch, and they turned to drugs. But one of the sons was like huffed a lot of gasoline, but they said he was so good that he could tell you what octane it was. Because so which I've never even tried it.
If you've never had gasoline in your mouth, what it did was completely suck every bit of moisture, like out of like your mouth completely like dries up like a desert. Like it was like one of the scariest things to me that I've ever encountered. Made sure I never got gas in my mouth. And it made me think of people that siphon gas. I'm like, that's like, because you have to get it to the point where it's coming out. I'm like, how many times has this person swallowed gasoline? All right, so that's a different time. All right, so I have a couple more stats. Per the Washington Post, the average American spends 70 hours a year on their lawn and garden. Now that's skewed because that's lawn and garden.
And we
So-
think you should be spending. Well, I shouldn't say you should be spending more time loving your garden
than
not
maintaining
maintaining
it. Yeah, I agree. Like sometimes as a peace of mind, you like working in the garden just for some quiet and
Yep.
becoming one with it. But and then my last stat that I looked up was per Freakonomics that Americans spend roughly 60 billion a year in the turf grass industry. So I think the funny thing is that the things that I tend to be against are all things that are big business. And I'm not against big business. I'm against the wrong business, you know, but you have turf grass, you have honeybees. What was the other one? Oh, cultivars. All things that are really going against the message that we're trying to spread, but they're such a big industry that they're not going to go down. I'm going to disappear before these businesses.
And it makes sense. It's if someone was attacking your way of life and how you did things for years. Oh yeah, you're going to defend it unless you're presented with really compelling evidence on why you need to change.
But it can change. When I was a kid, I used to get beat with a belt. I don't think that's too acceptable anymore. Actually, I don't know that I ever got beat. The belt got pulled out. My dad was a portly guy. And that was a big belt. Like when that belt came whipping, I was fast youngin. I could get away quick. I'm thinking, I was like, did I ever really get hit, or did I just get threatened and was good at getting away? So, but like, there's a lot of things that were acceptable 40 years ago that aren't acceptable now. If we keep spreading the word and giving good education, hopefully that these things can change.
But the one thing, so we listed off some of the downsides of lawn, but some of the benefits of it are it's a lot better than impervious surface.
Yeah, if you think
and it's a lot way better than bare soil.
Yeah.
And turf grass is really one of the only, and there's, when I say turf grass, there's numerous species of grass that make up what we consider lawn or turf grass. It's one of the only things that can tolerate the abuse that we give it. Think about like places you're walking, playing, golf carts, going to play baseball or sports or soccer. There's not, like, think about doing that on your native plant garden. No, are your plants going to live or not?
On creeping phlox or thyme. No, it's there's a reason why there is turf grass, because there is no alternate, you know, unfortunately for those types.
There's very few native species that work in those conditions. And I don't know if there's any that are native to the Northeast. There's buffalo grass is actually native across, I think from like Canada down to Texas, New Mexico through the Midwest and Western states, but it's not, I don't think it's native here.
Buffalo grass, I think is European also, I think.
There might be another.
Have you ever had buffalo grass vodka?
No, I haven't.
It's a Polish specialty, actually. Buffalo grass vodka with
interesting
with apple juice. There you
Yeah.
go. That's my mix. That's my bartender suggestion for.
But
I wish we had looked up the stat for how much impervious surface there are. Because that's a total killer right there. You know, but sorry.
Yeah. So with impervious surface, what happens is when it rains is basically the big thing. The water is just going off into storm drains, or it's going in the lawn or rain garden retention basin that's on the edge of that impervious surface, which is fine. It's I shouldn't even say that's fine. It's bad because it should be seeping into the soil slowly. But the bigger issue is, okay, well, I just washed my car on my driveway, which driveway's paved, it's impervious surface. So now I have all that soap is built up or I had a leak in my gas tank, and well, now all that gas is moving along with that water and going into your soil, which eventually will make its way into the groundwater.
I spilled gas while filling my lawnmower. You know,
so that's where the issue is with impervious surface, and grass is better than impervious surface because you're sequestering some carbon. You're using some carbon too when you go and mow that grass, or you maintain that grass, or you're fertilizing that grass. You're releasing carbon when you do those activities, but it is sequestering carbon up to, I think, like 900 pounds a year, roughly. So it can be a net carbon sink, depending on how you maintain it.
Now, I know you mentioned how much carbon it can sequester, but how does that compare with like forests?
It's in my opinion is not even close. So 1 acre of turf request or can sequester usually like 900 to 1,000 pounds. If you were to look at like a grassland, you're looking at like 2,500 pounds at a minimum, like a quality grassland, not a really poor grassland. And then forests can be in that like 2,000 to 6,000 pound range, depending on the quality of your forest. So yeah, those native systems can sequester a lot more carbon, but they can't take the abuse that we give them. They can't take the walking, running, and they also don't provide the safety requirements that a lot of what we need. Like you think about a college campus quad, where you want it to be well lit and visible, and you wouldn't want Indian grass on the side where it's 6 feet tall and you have like this Indian grass prairie in there. Well, you don't know what could be. It could be animals, it could be attackers, things can hide in there and not be seen. You want to have short grass that you can see is well lit and you can see across. So there's some safety concerns too that you don't get with a lot of native plants.
Yeah. Even if you had taller native plants, you wouldn't get Canadian geese and the nitrogen that they expel. Because they like that well manicured lawn, and they're just including more nitrogen in there. So it's.
Now, one of the things we actually had a listener write in to talk about some, I guess, lawn weeds, right?
Yeah.
And the benefits of them, which is one of my pet peeves, I guess, is I see every year. It's like, oh yeah, the dandelions and all this stuff is so good. Well, it's, in my opinion, and this is Sam Droege said this too, and he was episode 6, I think. He was one of the early episodes with the National Bee Inventory. The dandelions aren't bad, but they aren't really providing that much of a benefit. Is it better than
nothing
grass or nothing? Oh yeah, for sure. But there's so many native species that are so much more beneficial, and just having one of them is way better than having hundreds of dandelions in your yard.
Exactly.
So so it's not, like I said, it's not bad, but it's not as beneficial as it definitely is. It's beneficial as made out to be on Facebook. That's, like I said, it's one of my pet peeves every year. Is you see this like flood of, save the dandelions. By saving the dandelions, you're saving the bees. Well, not really. The bees need other stuff more than the dandelions. But
so we talked about negatives. We talked about some of the positives. What can our listeners do? We always like to give that approach. Like, all right, here's what you can do with this information that we just gave you.
So the first thing you need to do is fix your soil. And this is another reason why turfgrass is another reason it's beneficial. And Stephanie Murphy, actually, we went back and forth a little bit about turfgrass. And she supplied me with a lot of the stuff that her husband, who's the chair of the Rutgers turf program now, had written, and she'd actually worked on a lot of this stuff too. Turfgrass can grow in compacted soils. And you think about a lot of our housing developments, specifically here in New Jersey in the Northeast, well, none of that's native soil. It's all been moved around, and you had big equipment driving on it even when they're building the houses, now you have more equipment driving on it. So it's really, really compacted. And she was saying there's a really common image that's used with a lot of native plant discussions, where it shows like, this is how deep the roots are in Echinacea purpurea and big blue stem and little blue stem, and look how deep the roots go, and here's turfgrass and it barely goes like anywhere. And she says, turfgrass is definitely going to be shallower rooted than a lot of these other species. But a lot of times when we look at how shallow rooted turfgrass is, it's because that soil is so compacted too. And now if you're doing a lot of irrigation and now it's just, and all your fertilizers up top, there's no reason for the roots to go deep. So she said a lot of the reason why turfgrass roots aren't as deep as those isn't necessarily just because they aren't as deep rooting. It's because we're giving them everything they need right at the surface. So that's one of the things you need to do, is start fixing your soil. That's one of the things that dandelions are actually beneficial with, is they have a little bit deeper root than the grass is. So they're actually going to break up that soil a little bit more than your turf grass would. But the biggest things you can do is return some organics to that soil. So if you're composting, spread it on your lawn. Don't just let it go to waste. If you have extra at the end of the year, spread it on your lawn. When you mow, make sure you're leaving the clippings. Don't bag it up and dump it somewhere unless you're going to compost it and then return it. But if you just mow so that the short clippings and you're putting it back into the soil, that organic material is going to break down and be beneficial. Same thing with leaves in the fall.
I have never bagged clippings.
Yeah,
Never
me
raked
neither.
them up. Never bagged.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Which I actually had some kids ride by my house right after I got done mowing last summer, and my wife happened to be sitting on the porch, and I don't know if they saw her there, and then they were like yelling, and I'm like, "You gotta clean up your grass!" They were yelling right after I mowed. But
and you know what? That's coming from their parents, and that's that's just perception.
But and same thing, we talked about leaving the leaves. Well, you should leave them just for the Lepidoptera species and other species that need that stuff. But if you do need to clean them up, mulch them up and either compost them or just mow them and then leave them there, and that'll return some nutrients and organic material back into your lawn and improve your soil over time. So that's one of the first things you can do. One of the next steps was just reducing your lawn to the areas that you actually use. Well, like we said, if the kids and they're playing in the backyard, well, you're going to want grass. You don't want them running over your flocks, like you just said. So you're going to want some grass. So think about like where you have swing sets, if you have walkways where, oh, this is where I walk to the pool. Well, utilize that as turf, and then you plant in areas around it. If you have areas that like you want to keep safe, like in your front yard, and you want to make sure that you can see the road or you can see people who are walking up to your door, well, that's probably a place you want to have grass. So
we're not necessarily saying get rid of all lawns are bad, get rid of your lawns. Just reduce it. Like evaluate where you're at. And if you can take out some square footage of lawn, that would be wonderful. Yeah,
that's I brought up the example in the gardening episode that John McGee said, and he was saying how they had these big lawns in this development that they put these native gardens in, and before they put the native gardens in, and he's like, no one had any backyard patio furniture, no one was outside grilling, and then they put these gardens in, and then all of a sudden there's people outside and people were using that space. Well, so have a lawn if you're using that space. If you're not going out there, what's the point of having it? You're maintaining it, so a lot of times irrigating it, fertilizing it, but you're not utilizing it. So you keep lawn where you're going to utilize it. You don't need it where you're not walking on it and using it on a weekly or monthly basis. So next step is, you have those places where you aren't utilizing lawn, plant native plants. That's a big step, because now not only are you reducing your carbon footprint where you're putting lawn or taking out lawn, you're not mowing that and maintaining that area anymore. But you're adding stuff that's beneficial for the soil, beneficial for pollinators, beneficial for wildlife.
They would use less water, less maintenance. It would keep the insect population in check, or should help balance things. You're looking for that balance. So that more native plants would definitely help with that balance.
And I don't know if we talked about this before. I talked about it in another presentation, but like a lot of people say, oh, well, if I bring in all these other bugs, I'm gonna have mosquitoes. Mosquitoes actually are pollinators, but they thrive in stagnant water. So clean up those stagnant water areas, and you'll actually do a better job keeping mosquitoes away having the native plants, because you're bringing in all the predatory insects and bats and birds that are going to eat the mosquitoes too, versus just having grass and then still having those wet areas where you're going to have mosquitoes.
In the summer, and I had mentioned Agatha's backyard butts up to a natural area. In the summer, we literally just watch the bats picking off the mosquitoes at dusk. The sky fills with bats and you just watch it. So it's, but they have the habitat for that. So create that habitat, make it the right habitat for these things, and it would work.
And then the last thing that we had here, which is more of a group of things, was use more organic approaches. And this is where McCoy Horticultural, this is what they specialize in.
One of the things I will point out when I worked for the lawn care company was that if anyone called in asking for organic approaches, we were told to tell them that doesn't work. And to only sell chemical approaches. and we just had a collapse in the office here.
It's okay. We're almost done. But so the first thing you got to know is that this isn't a golf course. So you don't need to have it mowed like it's a putting green. Because that is going to, first thing, it's going to stress out your grass that you do have. Two, it's going to open up a lot of ground to weeds. I should back up. When you stress out your grass, that's when you need way more of those inputs. If you're constantly, think about it, you're literally cutting off the top of a living, breathing plant. You have something that's transpiring and is living, and you're decapitating it every week.
And you're creating more bare surface.
Yeah.
It's opening up that ground even more.
So would you rather just have something take off the little bit of the top of your hair, or like buzz you down to the scalp every time and then maybe nick you a little bit? No, you want to have something that is like a better haircut, and that's what you're doing with your grass. You want to make sure you're mowing. There's actually I got a tour of the University of Maryland turf grass facility last or 2 falls ago, and they did a study about mowing heights, and they mowed like a plot at 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches, and 4 inches, and then studied how many weeds came up. And when they mowed it at 1 inch, it was a ton of weeds. Wow. When you mowed it at 2 inches, you had less weeds, but you still had a lot of weeds. You mowed it at 3 inches, your weed pressure went way down. And when you mowed it at 4 inches, you almost had no weeds.
Wow. So
if you want fewer weeds, you don't need to mow it short and then use weed killers and use fertilizers and all this stuff. Just mow it a little bit taller, and you're not going to have the weed pressure, and your soil temperature is going to go way down too, which is beneficial in its own right. When you have shorter grass or bare soil, your soil temperatures go through the roof on like a hot sunny day like we're going to have today.
Totally.
So this was from a university, or Rutgers University, where they actually have a new organic land care group, which again, McCoy Horticulture is a part. Stephanie Murphy's on it, her husband's on it. They want to do more of this stuff, and they have a whole thing called the law of returns, where the big thing is you don't want to mow your grass and take away those lawn clippings, put them back in, because now that's becoming some organic material. It's returning nutrients to your soil. It's helping rebuild your soil versus only taking away. Same thing. You're pulling nutrients out of the soil through your grass, you mow it, and now you're taking away. Well, those nutrients are gone forever in that case. If you leave the clippings and you mulch the clippings, now they're going back in. So look at your fertilizer and irrigation, and again, recognize, do I actually have to do it? You live in the Northeast, in our case, you probably don't, as long as you have the right species of grass. As I mentioned before, there's tons of species of grass. Everyone wants Kentucky bluegrass, but
we always talk about the right plants in the right place. A lot of time when lawn is failing, it's the wrong grass in the wrong place.
You mentioned you have Zoysia grass in your yard, and Zoysia grass is, so you have, this is with native plants too, but you have warm season grasses and cool season grasses. Here in southern New Jersey, we're kind of in a transition zone, so you can get away with some warm season grasses, but you're probably going to want predominantly cool season grasses. We're at the very northern limit of that transition zone. Warm season grasses are going to green up later in the year, and where cool season grasses basically germinate and they'll become more active at cooler soil temperatures. That's the biggest difference. Is you have cool soil temperatures in March, April, May, and then getting into May, June, July, that's when your soil temperatures raise and your warm season grasses become more active. So you look at something like Kentucky bluegrass or your tall fescues, which are cool season grasses, you're going to have a green up early in the spring. When the sun gets too hot, they actually get stressed out, and that's why your lawns are going to brown out in the summer, but they'll stay greener over the winter, where your Zoysia grass is going to look dead in the winter and then be really lush and green in the summer. That's why your warm season grasses versus cool season grasses, you can sometimes use a mix of those grasses. You want to make sure you have the right mix of species. Like I said, everyone wants Kentucky bluegrass. That might not be the right mix for you, and you want to have a mix of Kentucky 31 is like the most popular one. Everyone advertised that. That's from like the 70s. That's not even the best grass.
But even where the Zoysia is, it doesn't grow under the heavy shade, and it doesn't grow where it tends to be wetter. It likes it dry and sunny. So I have different grass types in different areas. Obviously, it's not surviving under some of the trees and things like that. So it's, just be cognizant of your conditions and your soil, like with plants, and put the right thing in the right place.
So like we were saying, if you have the right grass mix, you're returning those clippings back to your grass, and you're not in a place where like all plants, turf grasses are going to have their own moisture requirements. If you're trying to grow grass in the desert, you're going to have to artificially add that moisture. Here in the Northeast, we don't have to. Well, that's going to limit your fertilizer and irrigation uses. Like I said, I will, to start grass. Well, yeah, you need moist soil. We haven't had much rain, so I was like, okay, if this grass is going to germinate, I need to get some moisture in there.
To me, I was always taught that the best germination and take for turf grasses were fall, because you have the right temperature and the right moisture. You can get it down without the extra water, get it established before winter. So come spring, you're ahead of it. So like if you're going to do an aeration is great for decompacting your soil. You can do that and do your seeding in the fall if you're going to seed, and it's the aeration at the same time. It's a good combination at that point.
So basically to summarize, we aren't saying you shouldn't get rid of lawn. Just get rid of the lawn that you aren't using. Plant more native plants in those places, and then the lawn you do have, make sure you're maintaining it the right way. You have the right grass in place. You're mowing it high, and it's actually pretty nice walking through like that tall, lush green grass when you with bare feet, when it's mowed the right way, when it's like not super short. And honestly, when I went to that meeting, I started mowing my grass that way, and it was like a night and day. I used to cut it like 2.5, 2 3/4 inches, and then I went to like 3.5, 4 inches, and it's like, oh wow, my lawn looks so much better, and I don't add anything to it. It's just mowing and returning those clippings.
I leave mine on the high setting, and I try to mow as little as possible. But that's because I don't like mowing. I don't like spending my time that way. It's at the end of my life. Like I don't want to be sitting there calculating the amount of time I spent mowing the lawn. Because I can't get that back. I'm like, man, I wasted at least 3 weeks mowing lawns. I could have done so many better things.
See, I love mowing the lawn because I find I do my best thinking there. And actually, fun fact is if I wasn't mowing the lawn, we probably wouldn't have this podcast, because that's when the idea came to me.
That's when I do my podcast listening. Is when I mow the lawn.
Exactly.
So
that's what happened. I was listening to another podcast, and they had Dr. Dwayne Estes from SGI on, and I was like, hey, we know him, and we know a lot of other cool people who would be really cool to have on a podcast. Fran's doing some music podcasting. Maybe we should have a podcast for plants. I actually just turned off the mower, ran inside to tell my wife, because I also have a terrible memory, and I was like, if I let this go like another minute, I'm gonna forget. So I literally ran inside and said, hey, remind me if I forget that I need to tell. This was a Saturday. Like, I need to tell Fran on Monday that we're going to start a Native Plants podcast, and then we did. Like 6 months later.
There we are. So I think that wraps up the lawn. What do you think? I think that's
it's it wraps up.
It's a lot to think about.
There's a lot to think about,
as always. But we appreciate your comments. If you're a member of the Facebook group, let us know your thoughts. If you have any cool practices or anything that you've learned. Someone actually shared a lawn.
Earlier this week, they shared basically a lot of the same things we just talked about, and I think they were having a webinar on this. I want to say it's on May 3rd.
I think
so. It's coming up. I'm going to look up while Fran takes us into his. You've been really positive, so I don't know.
No, and you know what? I typically haven't had any complaints, but I do have one complaint, and that is that I keep forgetting the pod deck cards. So I don't have them. So as soon as you look that up, I'm going to run out to get the pod deck card.
Yeah. So this was okay. So you can go. I got this. Claire Whitcomb actually shared, and she asked other people to please share it. It said, learn how to skip the lawn chemicals and create a yard that's safe for kids and pets. Sign up for this great talk May 3rd, 7:30 p.m. via Zoom at the Madison Public Library. The ABCs of organic lawn care. And basically it's a lot of the same things we just talked about, but I bet they're going to do a better job of making it clear and concise. Fran and I like to ramble sometimes. So if you are interested in what we just talked about and you want a little bit more guidance, go check out that webinar on May 3rd at 7:30 p.m. And say you're interested in this, but you don't want to do it yourself. I would reach out to our friend Rick McCoy at McCoy Horticultural, because that's what he specializes in. That's his whole thing that his business is built around, is planting more native plants and using organic lawn care. And the last thing is the Rutgers organic lawn care thing. I'll share the links on our our website and then the Facebook group as
Awesome.
well for that, because that's something they've started in the last year or two. That's pretty cool.
I know many of you are going to find this hard to believe, but I was voted most talkative in high school.
Yeah.
So I was. So
And we also received one star review on a podcast that simply said too chatty.
Too chatty. That was our 1-star review. So I do want to comment before I forget. I want to thank Jake from Tennessee for the 5-star review.
Yeah.
And we've actually corresponded a little bit, and he's another person that's a landowner trying to do the right thing and looking for some great information. So hopefully we can expand some of our future topics to kind of help cover, I think his biggest concern was how to, for a landowner on a large scale to remove invasives, what some of the options were, like going through options. Like we've had the invasive species strike team and we talked about invasives, but not necessarily real in depth. Mike Van Cleef did go into some removal, but it's, maybe do a little bit. We were talking about having for a rooted discussion.
For habitat management.
And
that
maybe
is
that
one
would help.
of the big keys of habitat management is you got to take care of them. You can't just clean up what you want to clean up and then leave all the invasives because they're just going to take over. You got to take care of them too.
So hopefully maybe in that rooted discussion, we can go a little more in depth. And we did receive a 3-star review with no comment. So that's not too bad.
Yeah.
It's middle of,
we strive for average. So.
Yeah. They thought we were okay. All right. Let me pick a card out here. Let's see what we got. Back to the Future. Make some predictions.
I don't know if I understand.
I'll just throw out some predictions. Let's do some industry predictions.
Okay.
Predict what we will see happening 20 years from now.
Okay. Oh, I'm going to throw out my own dates.
All right.
Stuff.
Okay.
I actually predict that New Jersey is going to have an invasive species plant ban in the next 5 years.
I would agree with that. I'd say 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
Because I know this is something that has been going on.
Yeah,
in New Jersey
we actually have a
years.
list of invasive species plants in New Jersey.
And
that my dad was a key part of putting together.
And that's going back 20 years ago.
That was 2009 is when the list was put out.
All right.
And and they would have been working on it for a while before then. And I think Mike Van Cleef was associated with that. Emil DeVito, I'm pretty sure, was associated with that.
The thing is, New Jersey has a very large nursery industry. So it's not an easy battle.
Yeah.
But I do see that coming. I don't know what shape or form it will take, but I do see that coming.
The reason I say that is actually proposed legislation to reintroduce that commission that went away about 10 to 12 years ago and restart that conversation. So and it just moved out of a committee and it's moving into, I think, the House chamber now in the state. So that's one. How about you, friend? You got another one?
Let's see. I think it's funny in the last 15 years, we've seen the amount of our competition double, but we haven't seen the amount of retail outlets double for native plants. I think in the next 15 years, we're going to see more retail outlets for native plants. And we have some great ones. We mention all the time here in New Jersey, Wild Ridge Plants, Toad Shade, Earth First, and PA. So
you have Summer Sweet down in Cape May, I want to say.
Yeah, Redbud Native Plant Nursery over in PA. I think it's in Collins Nursery. Diane.
Don't forget, do you have Geno's
in Newtown, PA. I can't think of her. Edge of the Woods is another one. So locally here, there's some great places, but I probably could have thrown all those out 10 years ago too.
There's more and more just popping up all over the place. It's just finding them is the big thing. A lot of them are small. A lot of them don't have. This is a thing across most businesses. A lot of small businesses is they, while they may be good at what they do, they're small and they don't either have the time to invest in a marketing or social media presence, or they just aren't skilled in it because their skills in growing plants. Sometimes it's hard to find a lot of those places.
All right. So 25 years from now, do you see an increase or decrease in how do I want to phrase it? Let's like the same amount of love for honeybees 25 years from now?
Oh, I think it's going to be less.
Okay.
it's the research is really just coming out about honeybees, and it's we've said it before. Honeybees serve a purpose. They have the purpose. Their purpose might not be pollinating native plants. Or I shouldn't say isn't. It's the research is pointing and saying it's not their purpose. They actually harm a lot of our native bee populations when it comes to crops, or even if you just want to produce honey. Okay, yeah, there's a benefit there, but I think eventually it might not be 25 years, but it'll be at some point. There's going to be a little bit of a turn.
Here's an interesting one for you. I'll throw one more out and then we can end that. 25 years from now, will what we are doing right now with this podcast, will it have made a difference?
That's another tough one. I think on personal levels, on with at least a handful of the listeners we have, I think we're making a difference. We're just raising more awareness. I would love to be in a point where we didn't have to do this. It's fun doing it.
Yeah,
I would love to not feel like we're constantly like pushing a boulder uphill. Again, like we're talking about lawn today, there's the turf grass industry is like in a huge state of flux right now because there's all these acquisitions, there's all these buying. The price of grass seed is through the roof right now because there's companies that were there for a long time that got bought. And I have a lot of friends that are in that turf seed industry, and they're saying, oh, I have contracts with companies that I've been working with for 20 years, and all of a sudden they got bought by someone and my contract's ripped up, and now I have to buy the seed for like way more money. So there's
what makes it worthwhile for me is, you'd love to be able to convert everyone to a small patch, but I had a friend reach out to me this morning from high school. I've known Sue since I was probably 17 years old. And she joined our Facebook group and she's started listening to the podcast and wants to start incorporating natives into her yard. And she asked me if I would help. That converting someone that I've known that long to say, hey, this is worthwhile and it makes a difference, and I'd like to play a part in this, was huge for me. That was a nice feeling.
What we keep saying is it's got to become a bigger part of your everyday conversation, and it's got to be easy and approachable. And this is one of the reasons we chose the tone of the podcast that we did was first probably getting like super scientific and stuff didn't really fit our personalities.
No.
But at the same time, it's got to be a conversation where the guy who wants to sit out on his back porch with the football game on a weekend afternoon, he's got to be almost unknowingly into native plants too. It's just got to be a part of like keeping his lawn nice is using native plants. And it's got to be easy for him to understand. It's got to be him or her. It's got to be easy for them to understand. And that was one of my gripes is we tend to make things like super, super difficult. And we're arguing about minutia when the biggest thing is, hey, people just got to switch from Japanese barberry to vaccinium or ilex or something native.
Give them a go.
We got to be using something native instead of something that's outright harmful to the environment. That's the first step. And it's got to be, like I said in that Facebook group, it's got to be something that is easy for people to decipher, and they're making those decisions without knowing all the scientific information.
And everyone has to be included. We have members of our Facebook group that are beekeepers, and we don't necessarily agree with the honeybees, but they're part of the context. Maybe at one point they'll see more our side, or maybe we'll even see more of their side. I don't know, but it's at least the conversation is happening, and I appreciate that we created a space where, I wouldn't be able to do a scientific podcast because I'm not scientific, and I wouldn't be able to do one that was super serious because I'm not super serious. I can be, but not consistently. So it's I think we created a good space, and hopefully it's making a difference. The fact that we have people like Skip Burns that have and Richard McCoy, who's in the industry, who's been listening from the beginning, and we're still able to turn their eyes to something maybe they didn't see or didn't hear is worthwhile for me.
Exactly.
I'm very, very, very proud of this.
All right. And for anyone at home, if you have predictions, share them in the group.
I would love to know.
We want to know everyone else's predictions. So.
I would, and you know, you can call the question and comment line and leave them on that. We'd be happy to play it. I wonder if Saul has predictions.
Yeah.
Or you can put them in the Facebook group and we can discuss them there.
So, all right. Well, with that, we are wrapped up. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed listening to The Buzz. Thank you, everyone, for listening to Native Plants, Healthy Planet, presented by Pinelands Nursery.
As always, we're giving a huge thank you to RJ Comer for our Buzz theme music. Make sure you stream or buy RJ's music on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you stream or buy your music. You can follow us on Twitter at Pineland Nursery, Facebook at Pinelands Nursery NJ, Instagram at Pinelands Nursery, or Instagram also at Native Plants Healthy Planet, and YouTube at Pinelands Nursery. We have the question and comment line that we just mentioned. You can call us at 215-346-6189. I will repeat that, 215-346-6189. Ask a question, leave a comment. If we pick your question or comment, we'll play it and answer it on a future episode of The Buzz. Let's not forget about our Facebook group. Man, we picked up a lot of new members. I think we're up to 360 some members at this point. So, and a lot of new members are pitching in, and we're happy to see that. So keep it going.
Yeah, you can listen to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast really at your favorite streaming service. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, really wherever you consume your podcast. In addition, you can listen to it on our website, www.nativeplantshealthyplanet.com. I always feel like I'm saying too few or too many W's.
Not even good.
But I think I've nailed it outside of last week.
I keep waiting for you to go into the WB commercial, the WWWWB.
That might have been before my time, friend. I don't know.
You know what? I just aged myself.
When you're on that app, whether it's Spotify, Apple, whatever, make sure you subscribe, leave a review, and share this with a friend. It really, really helps not just us, but helps spread the message of native plants and how beneficial they are. With that, thanks everyone. I'm Tom.
And I am Fran. Thank you again, everyone. We'll see you again next week for our meter guest. I don't want to say who it is because I'm pretty sure it's firm, but I just didn't get that last confirmation. Should I throw it out or no?
We can keep them waiting. It's called a tease.
Yeah, you gotta wait to find out. But it's a great organization that we're happy to talk to.
In the heart of the city.
Yes. So we'll see you again next time. Until then, keep it native.
Thank you for listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Remember to like, share, follow, and comment.